I'm Tom Friedland. I'm the president of the Berkeley City Club. I want to welcome any City Club members who have joined us this evening. I think most of the audience tonight is not City Club members. So let me just say a couple of words. If you're in the Bay Area, I'd like to encourage you to join the City Club. For those of you who are either in the Bay Area or not, the Berkeley City Club is both a social club and a hotel and a restaurant. It has one of the most beautiful swimming pools designed, the building and swimming pool designed by Julia Morgan. The building is an historic landmark. And we have one of the best chefs in the Bay Area. If you have not tried our food, you can have takeout, curbside pickup now. We're going to open for outdoor dining on March 6th. We have a nice terrace where you can eat. We're holding off opening for outdoor dining until the weather is a little bit more dry and warm, so that people will enjoy being outdoors, because we don't have great heating equipment for the outdoor tables. And if you're not in the Bay Area, I'd like to encourage you both to come to the Bay Area and stay at our hotel and eat at our restaurant. So my wife, Sandy, is in charge of this evening's program, and I will turn the program over to her.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandy Friedland, and I will introduce our speaker. I assume that most of you are familiar with the chat function on Zoom by now. At the bottom of your screen, there's a chat, and you can type in questions for Barrie at any time during his talk, and at the end, we will ask him your questions, and he will answer. So, if you are actually in Berkeley with us sitting, or those of you who are in Berkeley, if you are sitting in the beautiful members lounge at the City Club, I would ask you to raise your hands if you've ever tried to take a photo, probably with your cell phone, of the view from your window seat on an airplane. Or perhaps you tried to shoot through that little window in the rear door of the airplane in the days that we could wait in line for the bathroom. But even if you haven't posted your high altitude shots on Facebook or Instagram, or even if you don't know what those are, you certainly have known the ethereal experience of flying above a carpet of cottony clouds, or seeing how farmland becomes a patchwork quilt when viewed from 6 miles high. But imagine for a moment that you are not a passenger with an urge to record those sights, but instead you are a pilot, simultaneously flying a plane and trying to focus and shoot what's below, not through thick, scratched, dirty plexiglass, but through an open window, not at 500 miles an hour, but only 100 miles an hour, sometimes at only 1,500 feet above the ground, a height at which you could slam into the side of a mountain, a height from which the Bay Bridge looks like a giant's erector set. Depending on how vivid your imagination is, you may have recreated, at least from your comfortable chair, Barrie Rokeach's passion and life work, aerial photography. He has been multitasking this way, flying a single-engine aircraft and photographing the earth and sky for more than 40 years. He documents the often surprising hues and dramatic contours of urban and rural landscapes and what he terms the interplay between nature and industry. His commercial clients range from Chevron to Sharper Image, and his work has appeared in a who's who of impressive magazines, including National Geographic, Time, and Smithsonian. Some of his stunning photographs also have been shown in museums. Barrie also writes beautifully about the art and science of his vocation, as you can tell from how he describes photographing the coastline off Santa Catalina Island. I circled and swooped low along the coastline, enjoying the subdued curve receding into the distance, framed by icy cirrus clouds. With my lenses locked on infinity, I began to frame the land myself through the open rectangle of the window, hearing and feeling the changes in the airplane as we responded to the salt air. Adjusting the speed, the position and bank of my craft, more by instinct than design, I strolled back and forth along the coastline. But there's no need for me to quote Barrie any further. We're lucky to have him tonight to talk to us about his unusual occupation and 4 of his most impressive projects. His 3 books, Rising from the Bay, The Kodak Guide to Aerial Photography, and Timescapes, as well as the fine art images he produced for a new building at Oakland's Highland Hospital. So buckle your seatbelts and take us away, Barrie.
Okay. Excuse me one sec.
Yeah.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, but we're not seeing your screen, Barrie.
Okay.
I can see your screen.
Okay, we don't see his picture though.
His picture is up.
Okay, great. It's just us then. I see what the problem is. Okay.
Well, I'd like to start off by thanking Sandy and Wendy for inviting me to give this presentation, and to Madison for your tech support, and certainly to the Berkeley City Club for providing this venue. I'll get right into it with my first photograph. This is a cover of a book that was published in a few years after the bridge was constructed in 2016. And it comprises mostly my photographs that I was producing after being hired by the Toll Bridge Oversight Committee. I spent most of my time documenting this section of the bridge, which you can see, which is referred to as the SAS, the self-anchored suspension span. The causeway that leads up to this, I photographed a few times, but I began most of my photography around 2009 when the causeway was done and this section of the bridge was beginning to be constructed. So some of you may know that large steel sections of the bridge were actually manufactured in Shanghai, China. And they were shipped on this particular ship, the Zhenhua, all the way from Shanghai to the Bay Area. I was actually able to watch using a publicly available, publicly accessible website, and I could monitor the travel of this ship as it left Shanghai and came to the Bay. When this ship got within a day or so of the Bay, I would contact the Bay Pilots Association, the Bay Area Pilots Association. They were the operators of the tugboats that would go out the Golden Gate, meet up with the ship, and kind of guide it into its final berth at the Port of Oakland. So here you see that ship with some of the large steel structures approaching the Golden Gate. And here you see the same ship going under the western section of the Bay Bridge. Now you see 2 large rectangular objects. Those are referred to by the bridge engineers as orthotropic box girders, or OBGs for short. Towards the bow of the ship, you see 3 smaller rectangles. Those are called crossbeams. They actually hold the roadway in place. And I'll show you how everything kind of fits together in a few slides. This large crane was called the Left Coast Lifter, and it was also manufactured in Shanghai and brought across the ocean on the same ship that you previously saw. It was able to lift these large semi-trapezoidal shaped bridge segments off of the ship and place them on the barge. Now, neither the barge nor the Left Coast Lifter were self-propelled, so it took these tugboats that you could see in the photo to hold the barge and the left coast lifter in place and move it into position out towards the bridge. And this is what it looks like when the left coast lifter has just placed one of the OBGs on this kind of rusted metal looking track. That metal track, it was referred to as false work because although it was capable of holding the full weight of the bridge, when the bridge was finally constructed and all the weight was resting on the tower and the cables, the false work was disassembled and removed. If you look to the lower right corner, you can see that there are two other OBGs already in place. And this section of the track is on the eastbound direction that the traffic will eventually take. And that was the third OBG to be placed. So that OBG was referred to as OBG 3 East. Anything on the other track would be referred to as OBG West. You can see a gap in the track which allowed the left coast lifter to move in to be able to drop or gently lower, I should say. Sometimes it would take hours to lower that OBG down onto a dolly that was sitting on top of the track, which then would move down into position. This is the ship, the Jinhua, that came from Shanghai, and it's carrying some legs for the tower section. There were actually 4 tiers to the tower, and each tier had 4 legs for a total of 16. This is a somewhat rare meteorological phenomena called a pilot scory. You can see the shadow of my airplane cast on the fog below and a rainbow, actually a double rainbow, surrounding the shadow of the airplane. It's a rather rare phenomena and an even more rare photograph of that phenomenon. Here you see one of the legs being lifted into place off of a barge. It's lifted through the center of the roadway. You can see most of the roadway is in place, and you can get an idea of what the cross beams look like holding the 2 roadways in place. That was the first leg of the 4th tier. Now, if you look at the very top of the structure, you see a little shack, and there was a winch inside that shack that would lift these legs up. You'll also see a very large crane sticking up. That crane was not used to lift the legs. It was used to erect the scaffolding that you see surrounding the tower. The roadway is about 150 feet above the water level, and the eventual tower rises up about 525 feet above the water level. This is a typical fog that is so infamous or famous of the Bay Area. And normally the fog forms off the coast, comes in through the Golden Gate Gap and moves eastward and settles up against the East Bay Hills. Occasionally, as in this particular photograph, the fog is actually generated along the East Bay Hills and then moves farther to the west out the gate. Here I'm looking towards the west, and you're looking at the reflection of the sunrise on the water below. And you can see most of the OBGs are in place. The tower is well underway. All the cross beams, or not all the cross beams, most of them are in place, but there's still a couple gaps in the roadway leading up to the causeway. This was a milestone in the construction of the tower. It's called the saddle lift. You can see those 2 curved groove areas where the cable would eventually lie down in the saddle. It was the uppermost section of the bridge, or I should say the uppermost structural section. There's one more piece that goes on top of the saddle, but it's non-structural. It's just decorative. it was a milestone, and so a good occasion for dignitaries and engineers to monitor the process along the scaffolding. These are called catwalks. There are four of them along each section of the cable. They were constructed to allow the workers easy access to the cable as it was strung. It looks a little precarious, but there's a harness that each of the workers wears, and you can see a wire that's strung along the catwalk. That's a safety wire that clips into the harness that the workers wear. Here you see three of the four catwalks. The fourth one is actually there, but it's hidden by the tower. Now you see the left coast lifter about ready to place another OBG. That was actually the 13th OBG east. There's a total of 14 OBGs on each section of the bridge. This is a typical morning commute that I would often see. The construction of the bridge took place all hours of the day and night. Sometimes it would start early in the morning before sunrise, go all day long, and extend through the evening long past sunset. So I had to be prepared to shoot anytime, night or day, if I wanted to capture each step of the process. This was shot about an hour and a half or so before sunrise. You can see all the OBGs in the eastern section are in place. This is the very final OBG 14 West, and it was another milestone. And because of that, it was a good opportunity for a PR photo with a bunch of dignitaries and engineers. You can see a close-up shot of how the crossbeam fits in place, and directly underneath the crossbeam, you get an idea of the support from the false work, which again is ultimately removed. Let me go back to this photograph 1 second. If you look to the left of where the people are standing, you'll see what looks like to be a stepped area that goes down below the surface of the OBG. And there's a big cement block there. And that's where all the strands of the cable are connected. Here in this photograph, on the right-hand side, it's just another shot of that same thing from a different direction. This big spool of silver wire that you see is the very first strand of wire for the new cable. There were a total of 137 of these strands, and each one of these strands is comprised of 127 5mm high tensile steel wires. Ultimately, when all the strands are strung along the bridge, they're compressed into a 31-inch diameter cable that comprises the final cable. Each of those wires is about 1 mile long. And this is just a shot showing the nighttime activity of stringing the strands along the cable. Now you see the cable is mostly in place, or it's actually all in place. There was actually a machine, a compression device that would travel along the length of the cable and compress it down into those 31 inches. Those blocks that you see periodically spaced along the cable hold the ultimate cable in compression. They also were attachment points for the suspension cables. And the suspension cables, there were 200 of them, and they were attached to the outside of each side of the roadway. If you look at the very top, you'll see the beginnings of the eventual bike and pedestrian walkway or pathway. A small section of the bridge lighting has been put in place. You'll see over there on the left. And this was the first light test of that section of lighting. And this is just another shot, a little bit closer up a few minutes later with the Port of Oakland in the background. What's interesting here is that the lighting engineers were not aware that there was so much spillover onto the waterway. So after they saw this photograph, they had to go back and do a little bit more work to redirect the lighting onto the pathway. Now the cable is in place, and you can see that final non-structural decorative piece sitting on top of the saddle. The cable is in place, the suspension cables are in place. Everything is being suspended by the tower and the cables. So the scaffolding is no longer necessary, and that large crane on the left is starting to remove that kind of orangish scaffolding material. And the catwalk is no longer necessary. It's being removed. You can see the workers walking along that 31-inch diameter cable. It looks rather precarious, but nonetheless, they're attached to the safety wire with their harness. Now, Sandy said that I spent most of my time around 1,500 feet above the bridge, and that's true. It required by FAA 1,000 feet above any obstacle. But if I'm 500 feet laterally away from an obstacle, there's really no altitude restriction. So here I am flying about 150 feet above the water, just maybe slightly above the level of the bridge. One of the things that I like to try to do in my aerial photography is take it a little bit beyond the normal. And in this particular case, you can see the red aviation lights on the top of the tower. Those are required by the FAA on any tall structure to warn low-flying aircraft. Those aviation lights flash on and off, so my goal was to try and catch them just as they flashed on. This is just another shot of the bridge. You can see the roadbed, which is actually made out of steel. It's been layered with asphalt at this point, but the lane striping hasn't been finished. Golden Gate Bridge in the background. Again, the aviation warning lights on the top of the tower. And this is a typical fog hovering over Yerba Buena Island. What's interesting is just on the near side of Yerba Buena Island, all those lights down by the water are a Coast Guard facility. And there's actually quite a bit of Coast Guard activity with helicopters flying in and interacting with Coast Guard vessels doing emergency practice and other maneuvers. And I had been flying around the bridge photographing for about a year when one day I got a call from the Coast Guard and they said, you know, we don't mind you flying around the bridge taking photographs, but it sure would be nice to know beforehand when you're coming in. So from then on, whenever I was about to go out and take photographs, I'd have to call the Coast Guard and let them know that I was coming in. I'm not really sure how necessary that was because there was a discrete frequency that I would monitor along with the Coast Guard helicopters, the highway patrol, the police, the news helicopters, just about anyone in the know that had that secret frequency. And we would make position reports on a regular basis with altitude reports as well. And so everyone knew what we were all doing, but I was happy to comply with the Coast Guard traffic control. This photograph was used on the cover of a book about the construction of the bridge. You can see Sutro Tower on the left and Transamerica in the back. And it was the cover of a book published, written by a professor at Cal and College of Environmental Design. Now the bridge is pretty close to being finished. You can see the lane striping on the asphalt. This is the final light test. And everything's ready for the final opening day, which was in September of 2013. Now we'll move on to my next project. I had been working for Kodak for a number of years. In fact, they hired me to edit and revise a publication titled Photography from Light Planes and Helicopters. It was the M5 publication. However, that publication, it was a small pamphlet and it dealt primarily with topological survey. It didn't really deal with illustration photography, which is a kind of photography that I do. What's interesting about this photograph is it was shot long before the advent of digital photography. And no, it's not even a composite. It's a real life, one snap of the shutter photograph. I actually did my commercial rating in that very airplane. It's called Citabria. So I was very familiar with how that airplane flew. So I was able to give the pilot explicit instructions on altitude, airspeed, direction, and route, and everything, and capture this shot in one pass. If you've used a telephoto lens on a camera, you know that it has the capability of compressing distance. And so this airplane was actually about 2,000 feet laterally away from the tower of the bridge. I was another 2,000 feet laterally away from the Citabria. Using the long lens, I was able to compress the distance and make it look like the airplane was landing on the bridge. Now, the book contains chapters on technology, equipment, photographic style, business safety, aviation regulations, just about everything. It's about 160 pages and over 140 photographs. This is White Sands National Monument. It lies adjacent to White Sands Missile Test Range, but the airspace above the monument is controlled by the Missile Test Range. So it required several months worth of letters and phone calls long before email to arrange permission with the Missile Test Range to fly above this. So they assigned me a day and a particular few hours long in advance. If that wasn't bad enough, I was required to take a spotter up in the airplane with me from the Missile Test Range to make sure I didn't get too close to anything sensitive or photograph anything too sensitive. I had no idea what the weather was like, and this is what the weather was like on that particular day. Now, if you've ever tried to photograph lightning, you know the technique is to plant your camera firmly on a tripod on the ground, open up the shutter, and just wait for a lightning bolt to strike and then close the shutter. Well, you can't really do that when you're flying along at 100 miles an hour, because if you did, everything in the foreground and even the middle ground would be very soft and blurry. But I was able to time this lightning bolt so that everything is nice and sharp. This is another photograph of the Pilot's Glory. It's a very faint rainbow around the Golden Gate Bridge. All the photographs in the Kodak book are tied into the text on the particular page. So they're not just random photographs. Here I was talking about the necessity of having multiple camera bodies and how it allowed you to switch from one film to the next rather quickly. These sheep are grazing in the area east of Lake Berryessa. And this is a reflection of the late sunlight on the waves in the North San Pablo Bay area. And the sun reflecting off a solar farm down by Taft in the South Central Valley. These are large piles of almonds. They have been fumigated and covered with plastic. If you look at the second row, the two on the right, they haven't been covered with plastic. And I don't know if my cursor will work here, but if you can look right here, you'll see on the third or the fourth row down, a large tractor and another one over here. That just gives you a sense of scale of these piles of almonds. Here is a tractor seemingly undoing the progress of one tractor. This is in the area east of Livermore. This is one of my earliest abstracts. I think it was shot in 1977. It's a photograph of the shoreline of Lake Berryessa during a drought. So the sun is reflecting off the muddy shoreline and the speckled water in the lake. These trucks, Chevrolet trucks, have just been removed from a ship at the port of Benicia. This is a very steep housing track, or a housing track on a steep slope. And what you see, again, I'll try to show you with my cursor. What you see coming from the left is a flat housing track. It comes to the edge of a cliff where this black shape is. The cliff drops off, the sun's coming from the left and creates this dark shadow. And this cliff is flat here and drops off again. Each one of the rectangles is a plot for a house, and that long skinny thing with a circle on top is a cul-de-sac. These are the World War II mothball fleet in the Carquinez Strait, just north of Concord. Some of you may remember the Day in the Life of books that came out a number of years ago. They were organized such that a group of photographers from all around the country would come to a particular location and photograph for a day and produce a book. There were actually several different groups producing those kinds of books. I was involved with two of them. The title of this book was Ireland, A Week in the Life of a Nation. Unlike the other books, the Day in the Life of books, which were organized by photojournalists, and so most of the photographers were photojournalists, the books that I worked on brought in fine art photographers from all over the world. And we each kind of worked on our specialty. Obviously, in my case, aerial photography, but whether someone's specialty was landscape or portraiture or industry or whatever it may be, we all shot for our time period. This was in the southern part of Ireland at an amusement park. There was a lake in the middle of the amusement park. And I guess for some reason they parked these boats up at the lake on this little island in the middle of the, after the amusement park closed. This is Mount Adams in the foreground, Mount Hood in the background, Adams in Washington, Hood in Oregon, and I'm up at around 14,000 feet. And yes, oxygen is required, usually above 12,000. And I carry oxygen with me when I go to high altitudes. This is logging in the Columbia Gorge, just north of Portland. And this is another one of those international photo books, Thailand, 7 Days in the Kingdom. And you're looking at flooded rice fields. And that's in the southern Gulf of Thailand. These are salt flats, salt evaporation ponds also in the southern Gulf of Thailand. Unlike our salt evaporation ponds here in the South Bay, which are harvested using large tractors, you can see about 8 or 10 people down there with long broom-like sticks harvesting the salt into these round piles. The golf course, Discovery Bay, adjacent to a housing tract, casting shadows. And down near the area in Southern California called Paris, Perris, is a citrus grove. The perpendicular lines are a dirt road, but shortly after the grove was planted, it rained, and the rain washed away the freshly planted seedlings, creating this pattern in the grove. Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone National Park. Red Rock River, Montana, an old river. And this is perhaps my most well-known and well-used shot of the bridge and the city in the background. This photograph has been used in posters and note cards, and magazine covers and book covers, television and advertising, just about everything you can possibly imagine. California is a very diverse state, and it's also the most diverse geologically. A subset of geology is geomorphology, which is the study of the landforms and the forces that shape and create them. So there are 11 geomorphological provinces in California. I was able to combine those into 7 chapters, about 130 pages and over 100 photographs. And the text in the book talks about the geology that's going on in each particular chapter and that you see evident in the photograph. And no book about the geology of California would be finished without the beautiful sand dunes of Death Valley. These are called complex sand dunes, and they're called that because sand dunes are named by the direction of the wind that creates them. Complex because the wind direction changed rather rapidly, at least geological time frame rapidly, to create these abstract shapes. When the wind blows in one direction for a long period of time, it creates what are called parallel sand dunes. Now, the wind and the sun are blowing from the lower left corner to the upper right corner. And again, I'll try and point out with my cursor. You can see the sand dune at on the desert floor. It comes up to a peak where the black area starts and drops off precipitously, creating a shadow. And then the next sand dune comes up to a peak after that. Another black and white photograph of the complex sand dunes. One of the things that I enjoy trying to find in my aerial photography is to take advantage of the perspective because occasionally you can find visual illusions. Normally when people view a landscape, the sun is shining from the top towards the bottom of the photograph. But when you're flying along in an airplane looking almost straight down, the actual direction of the sun is arbitrary. So because of that, you can sometimes get a visual illusion. Now, some of you may see these squiggly white and black lines as depressions down in the dark brown surface of the desert floor. Others may see those squiggly lines as superimposed upon the top of the desert floor. Now, if I take this exact same photograph and flip it upside down, again, it's rather arbitrary, which is up and which is down. You might see the exact opposite thing. So if you saw it before as something depressed down into the desert floor, here you might see it rising above the surface of the desert floor. These are the hills on the eastern side of Death Valley, Zabriskie Point. And these are 1,000-year-old indigenous intaglios. They are very delicate and easily damaged, as you can see by someone who came by with an automobile or a truck and unfortunately damaged them before the chain link fences were put in place. The geology here is that the severe weathering from the rain and the sun beating down on the desert floor over eons actually turns the desert floor a darker brown. But that only goes down to a depth of a couple inches. If you scrape away those couple inches, you see the lighter color of the desert floor, as the indigenous people did here. Now, these intaglios are down by the little town called Blythe in the southeast corner of the state near Arizona. They are not marked on any maps, not on any aviation or road maps, and I had no idea where they were. I just knew that they were somewhere near Blythe. So I just hopped in my little airplane one day, flew down there, and spent 2 or 3 hours in a very frustrating time trying to find them. I had to land at Blythe to refuel, and it just so happened there was an airplane refueling next to me. I struck up a conversation and told the pilot what I was doing, and he said to me, "Oh, follow me." So he took off, I took off right behind him, and after about a half an hour, he'd led me to these intaglios. There are actually a half a dozen of such intaglios scattered around the Blythe area. I photographed one other. It wasn't quite as spectacular as this patch. I don't know if I could ever find them again. Inadvertently, I didn't mark them on my aviation map. Maybe I just have to get lucky and find another local pilot. This is a shoreline along Jenner. And those rocks that are sticking up in the ocean, they're called marine stacks. And they are where the shoreline used to be before the corrosive weathering action of the waves drove the shoreline farther to the east inland. Eventually, the waves will corrode those marine stacks. And those marine stacks are left there because they were just harder portions of the shoreline. But eventually they will be washed away or eroded away farther to the left. The shoreline will move and eventually leave more marine stacks over on the left. Saddlebag Lake in the Sierras, a frozen lake. The marbled bluish area is the frozen ice. The white speckled area is where the wind blew the water that hadn't yet frozen. The dark black lines are where the wind was not strong. And so you're looking down through the depths of the water. This is Buckeye Pass. I'm up at around 18,000 feet. I stay just below 18,000 feet because you're required to file an IFR flight plan at that altitude. But when you do so, you can't fly, meander around and just decide I'm going to go here or I'm going to go there. You have to fly from point A to point B on a specific time schedule. But I like to meander around, and so I stay below 18 and avoid that restriction. During that very special 3 to 4 weeks during the spring of each year, the slopes of Mount Diablo turn this beautiful effervescent green. And then shortly after, the color that we see them for the rest of the year. And the cliffs of Pescadero mimicking the waves that created them. The Point Reyes Peninsula. A few years ago, I was hired by the Alameda County Arts Commission to provide artwork for a new wing of Highlands Hospital in Oakland. I was one of about a dozen other artists. There was one other photographer who did landscapes on the ground. And my challenge here was to stay within the boundaries of Alameda County, which unfortunately are not marked on the aviation maps. So not really easy to determine what the boundaries are. But my main challenge was to try to find and document those sections of Alameda County that were still relatively unencumbered and wild. And these are the slopes near the hill line near Lake Del Valle. This is the old river basin in the mud flats south of the San Mateo Bridge Eastern anchorage, and that's just an old tributary. These are the Emeryville mud flats. And some of you may recall down here at the bottom, these mud flats where in the past you could see sculptures stuck in the mud, and you would be able to view them as you drove along Highway 80 southbound just before the turnoff to San Francisco. Of course, I couldn't avoid the beautiful hills around Altamont Pass. And more beautiful hills with a little creek bed and scattered oak trees in the hill line north of Livermore. These sheep were grazing on the East Bay Hills southeast of Oakland Airport. What made it a little tricky was that's directly underneath the flight path of the large transport and passenger aircraft coming in to land at Oakland Airport. I wasn't too worried about the aircraft because they were still several thousand feet above me. What I was worried about was the large wingtip vortices that are created by these aircraft. As any airfoil passes through the air, wingtip vortices are created. The slower the airplane flies, the heavier the airplane is, the bigger and the stronger are those wingtip vortices. So anytime one of those aircraft would come by, I'd have to kind of scoot out of the way and kind of circle in the adjacent area for 10 or 15 minutes, waiting for those wingtip vortices to subside. These hills are in the Pleasanton Ridge regional area. And some of the hills near Lake San Antonio, or referred to San Antonio Reservoir. Top left corner, you can see some vineyards. This is the Berkeley South Saline Basin, and I'm capturing the golden late sunlight reflecting on the water. You can see shadows from the trees from the Berkeley Marina. And this is where you often find windsurfers and sailboats. And I've captured one of those sailboats in the bottom central area of the photograph. These are the salt evaporation ponds at the Newark Slough. And more salt evaporation ponds at the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. They are in this far southwestern section of Alameda County. And when I photograph something I fly around in circles, sometimes for hours on end. What I'm looking for is a change in color, lighting, contrast, the three-dimensional qualities of the subject. Everything, including the tone, can change dramatically. So these same tidelands, which are off Coyote Point, right near the San Mateo anchorage, from a different direction. When water flows along a gentle slope, it sometimes takes along this particular pattern, which is called a dendritic flow, which is named for the tree-like shape of the pattern. And these are the hills and some oak trees along the Ohlone Regional Wilderness area. And I'll finish up with a couple of photographs I took just last week, and the same image from the opposite direction to demonstrate the effect of the lighting on the landscape. And that's it. I want to thank you all for attending. I really appreciate your attention tonight. I welcome your questions. You can enter the chat and ask me questions now, or if you prefer, you can send me an email through my website.
That was amazing and very soothing, Barrie.
Thank you.
A real hour of pleasant escape. So before you leave us with your screen share, I neglected to talk about your amazing postage stamp. Do you have a picture of that handy?
Actually, no.
Oh, well, and Barrie had well, you explain it. You have what this stamp is.
Well, I think it was around 2012, the US Post Office purchased the use of one of my photographs for a series of stamps that were called Earthscapes. I was one of, I think, about a dozen other images that were used in these forever stamps. It was quite an honor and quite a surprise. I had no idea that they had even spent any time on my website, but apparently they found an image that they liked and commissioned it for their series.
And it's a gorgeous one. All right, well, we have a lot of questions here and we will go straight through. First one is, where can we get reproductions of your gorgeous work?
Well, for reproductions, you can contact me directly. For copies of the book, the Timescapes book is available on most of the used book websites. I was surprised. I looked just the other day in the Kodak book. I couldn't find it anywhere, but I have copies of it. The Bridge book the publication was very, very limited. It was published by the Toll Bridge Oversight Committee, and there was a limited distribution. I still have availability to make copies of that book. Unfortunately, I have to use an online one-off publisher, and it's very expensive, somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100 my cost out of pocket to produce that book. It's it's a couple 100 pages long with full color photographs on every page. So I can see why it's pretty expensive. But those are the only options for getting images from me.
So we should post your website. You can do it in the chat function at some point before we hang up.
Okay.
Goodbye. Okay, lots of questions here. Flying in crowded airspace is complicated enough without taking pictures. Do you ever have an assistant either to fly or take pictures?
The answer is no to both. I have, well, actually, that's not quite true. There have been a couple occasions where I was in a very high traffic area, and I did think it would be advantageous to have another pilot along with me to spot traffic. That only happened maybe a half a dozen times at the most. most of the time I like to be by myself. I find I'm able to do exactly what I want. I'm not distracted any more so than, say, dealing with the air traffic control. I'm not distracted by dealing with another pilot giving me suggestions or asking questions. I like to kind of operate on myself. I'm very kind of calm and relaxed and peaceful up there. And I think being by myself keeps me that way.
Yeah. Have you noticed significant changes in the landscape over your career due to climate change?
I have not. I have not. But that is, I think, only because the changes in the landscape are still at this stage rather subtle and not that easily visible from the air. I think I may unfortunately live long enough to see some more dramatic changes that I'll be able to photograph from the air.
So I should have shared the names of our questioners. So the asking if you had help in the cockpit was from Jeannie Perkins, and the climate change question is from Ellen Griffin. And Meg Conkey would like to know, how many people are there out there who are doing this kind of amazing photography? Is there a network that communicates and exchanges information and ideas?
Meg, if you want to ask me questions, just walk out your front door and come down about 2 houses. Meg is my next door neighbor. Well, right now, everyone's an aerial photographer. There are, I think, over 250,000 people who have registered with the FAA to fly drones. And a large percentage of them can do it, fly drones and take photographs for commercial purposes. In terms of photographers specifically who fly themselves and simultaneously take photographs, I don't believe there are too many of us. They do come and go. It's not something I generally recommend to anyone, although I've been doing it for about 45 years. I didn't even start doing aerial photography until I had been flying for about 10 years. So it's a pretty tricky thing, and people often find themselves in desperate, difficult situations if they aren't experienced. As far as a network goes, I'm not aware of any network of aerial photographers. There may be, I'm just, maybe not plugged into that network.
Okay, Lewis Watts says, really beautiful work, my old friend. And
Thank you, Lewis.
Jonathan Rosenberg wanted to know where to get reproductions. So Teresa and Mike Olson would like to know, did you or anyone else document the disassembly of the eastern span of the Bay Bridge?
I wanted to, and I tried to. But by the time I had finished documenting the construction, I think they had it with me, and they decided they didn't really want to see the thing torn down. So the answer to that is no. My last photograph on the construction of the bridge was the Zhenhua, the ship from Shanghai, taking the left coast lifter out from the bay underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and out into the Pacific.
Okay, Barbara Jacobitti would like to know, what kind of cameras do you use? And I'm not sure I understand the second half of this question. Are they in a gimbal?
I use 35 millimeter most of the time, although on occasions I've shot everything. I've even experimented with 4x5 and 8x10 a couple times. But I think my camera of choice is 35 millimeter. I do have by gimbal, if you mean whether it's attached to some part of the airplane, no, I handhold the camera in my arms. So it's not attached to the airplane in any way.
Great stuff, Barry, from Stanley and Wendy Finger. Beautiful work from Ethan Aiken. Let us know when the recording is available. He will. Okay. From George Post, any idea why 137 wires in each bridge cable?
I haven't the slightest idea. That's one of the few questions. What was interesting? I almost got a section of that cable. shortly before the bridge was finished, they held a party at the Sawtooth Building, which was adjacent to the toll booth, for all the engineers and all the people who worked, all the workers. And they had a big party there. And during that party, they raffled off for some 5013 organization for a good worthy cause. They raffled off a large bolt that was about 2.5 feet long and a section of the cable. And one other thing, I don't remember what it was. Well, I got the bolt, it's sitting in my office, but I didn't get the cable. And I have no idea where they came up with that number.
Yep. All right. Janice Kelly would like, well, incredible photos, and she would like to know, and we talked about this a bit, are many of the effects created during developing or enhanced on your computer, I guess is the second half.
You know, I want to thank you all for these questions. And I think that's a really important question. And at one point, I forgot to mention it. But all of the photographs I did of the bridge were shot during the digital age. But I've been shooting for a long time, and I started off back when, you know, film and negatives still existed, long before digital. When I shot film, the extent to which I would manipulate the print when I was in the darkroom getting my hands dirty was just to try and bring out the essence of the photograph so that the print resembled my recollection of what I saw when I took the photograph. Now, I know you can do just about anything in the digital age, and I have done it, but I don't do that to my photographs. I try to bring out the essence of the photograph, just like I did during the film age, and I don't add anything or I don't embellish anything. So everything you see in all my photographs is as close to what I can remember it being like when I saw it and snapped the shutter.
Okay. Thanks for showing the Canyon Court shot in Benicia, says Craig Schumacher. I have it on the wall just to the left. Are you renting planes in the Bay Area, or do you own one again?
Well, my former airplane partner is online here, Howard Brainin. I saw your name there a little earlier. Howard and I used to own a Cessna 182 for many years, and we loved it. For whatever reason, Howard and I eventually, there you are, Howard and I eventually sold it. I like to tease my wife because I eventually ended up selling my share just before I got married, but really it had nothing to do with her. So long before I owned an airplane, I was renting, and I'm still renting now. But who knows? I might buy another airplane any day now.
Is Zach your son?
Zach is one of my sons, yes.
Okay, so he's letting us know your website, which is Barrie at Rokeach Photo, ROKEACH photo.com is your email address. And
that's my email address. And the website is just simply rokeachphoto.com. But you can also contact me through the website.
Great job, Barrie from Karen Baird. Zach again has your website posted. Howard Brainin, great job, Barrie. Nice to see your photos again. Let me see if there are any more questions. Lots of compliments. We won't turn this off. Oh, what kind of plane do you fly? Joey Carafica would like to know.
Well, I've flown all the single engine aircraft made by Cessna, from the 150, 152, 172, 182. I've never flown a 206, but a 210. Now, the 210 is the top of the line single engine Cessna. Nowadays in the Bay Area, when I'm tootling around, I use the bottom of the line, a Cessna 150. It's really a 152. It's really an ideal platform. When I go up to altitude, I need more power, so I might take a 182 or a 210. But primarily, I'm flying a 152. And the Cessna aircraft have the wings above the cockpit, And that's ideal for aerial photography because when the wings are below the cockpit, they get in the way. You can't see through.
Okay, Jean-Marc Pesch, I don't know, Peschard is inviting you to take pictures of Mexico City.
Jean-Marc and Fedora are old dear friends from my days at Cal.
And these don't look like, we explained this at the beginning, but you can say it again. These don't look like they're taken through a scratched plexiglass plane window. Are you taking them through an open window, cold, windy, scary?
Yeah, all the above, except for the scary part. No, I open the window of the airplane and definitely do not shoot through the deformed scratch plexiglass. There's really no way to get a decent photograph through any kind of plexiglass, even if it's clean. Although I actually did it once when I was flying over Mount Shasta in a commercial airliner. I guess I was lucky and the plex wasn't too scratched. But no, I opened the window and it's not scary because the level of the window is about shoulder height and it's not a big window. It's maybe 2.5 feet by 1.5 feet. And so I'm not worried about falling out. The only thing you might be worried about is dropping your camera or something like that. But I stay well within the area of the window. If you try to stick anything, your hand, a camera, out into the wind stream going 100 miles an hour, you're not going to get decent photographs and you're likely to lose your camera.
So I think it's your cousin, Ina Baker. Some years ago, Barry invited me to fly with him and watch him take aerial photos. It was one of the very special life experiences. Thank you, cousin Barry.
Hello, Ina.
Ina, okay. From Isaac Kaplan, thanks for the beautiful show. As an engineer, I can assure the questioner about the strands for the cable that there is a most likely a calculation package somewhere that documents why that's the number. I'm sure that's true.
You know that the MTC website, I think is mtc.ca.gov. Somewhere on that website are all 40,000 of my photographs of the Bay Bridge and also a detailed description of the construction process. And who knows, maybe they'll talk about the engineering specs right there.
Howard, well, let's see. Gorgeous photos, Barry, from Carter. Thanks for taking us on a wonderful journey. Tonight was such a treat. And there's a lot of other thank yous that I may have missed one or two. But I think that's it. I had 2 questions quickly. Number one, I asked you, were you ever asked to spy?
I keep on waiting for the FBI to knock on my door. Unfortunately, if they ever do, it'll probably be to put some handcuffs on me and lead me out the door. But the answer to that question is no. I used to hang around with a bunch of spies back on the East Coast because my former roommate, Hugh Lewis, was in law school back in Washington, D.C., and I used to go visit him. And a lot of his law school buddies were CIA and FBI and God knows what else they were. And we'd hang out together and go bike riding and play handball and drink beer and whatever. But somehow they all forgot me and they never asked me to join the ranks.
So I suspect this is your daughter. She wants to know who cuts your hair. Well,
my wife.
To end this, I had asked you what your most challenging projects were. I think you just went through one of them, was trying to figure out where Alameda County's boundaries were. But you had 2 others. I don't remember. Do you remember what you said?
Well, you know, quite honestly, I think one of the biggest challenges that I faced was photographing the bridge. I shot it from 2009 through its opening in 2013, 5 long years. And that was by far the longest project that I had ever worked on. Any other project was more in the realm of months, certainly not years. And I think the challenge for me there was to document the bridge, document each of the milestones, and maintain my my interest and my sense of extravaganza of watching this incredible process and trying to get unique photographs of each step of the process. I made somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 flights over the course of that 5 years. And I can say that on almost every single one of those flights, it was a unique experience. And so I was pretty happy that I was able to accomplish that over that time period.
So I think you also said you had an assignment to photograph Lake Tahoe.
Oh yeah. That was a tough shot. I mean, I've had a lot of tough shots like that. I had an assignment from Audubon magazine. I used to work for them, and they wanted a photograph of the entire lake. But at the time, I didn't have an airplane that would go much above 18,000 feet, which in fact, as I mentioned before, suited me just fine because I didn't want to have to file a flight plan. So I was up there at 18,000 feet, and I could get the entire lake, but I was kind of shooting at an angle like this, and I wasn't shooting straight down at it. I'd probably have to be up there around 20 or 30,000 feet in order to, well, actually more than 20, probably 30 or 40,000 feet to be able to see the entire lake. I think it's in the neighborhood of 25 miles long. And so I'd have to be at quite an altitude to be able to look straight down at it. Speaking of altitude, one of my friends mentioned to me earlier in the day that later on tonight, you can get that very altitude at 11 o'clock tonight on Channel 9 is a program on aerial photographs from the space station. So just in case you want to continue the conversation.
Okay, we'll wrap it up in a second, but Jonathan Rosenberg wants to know if you have a dream project.
I have a number of dream projects, but I don't really like to talk about them. I don't talk about projects that I'm working on. Or that I'm thinking about in the future. I like to talk about projects after I've finished them. But the answer to the question is yes.
So Ari, another son, wants to know, how many flights have you flown? How many times? Have you flown?
Yeah, I haven't totaled them, but I've got around 2,000 hours in the air. I probably have another 100 or so hours sitting as a passenger in a helicopter, shooting out of a helicopter, which I am forced to do on rare occasions. So flying the airplane myself, pilot and command, about 2,000 hours. But I haven't actually totaled the number of flights that accrues to that.
And Greg Schumacher wants to know if you're going to update your iconic San Francisco bridge shot now that there are new buildings.
You know, I should, Craig. Craig, if you're still doing graphic design, find me a good client.
Yeah, anyway, there are a lot. Roddy, it's hard for me to read this. Roddy, Stella, this was wonderful. I always want to take photos from a plane over what we're seeing below. I'm so envious of your photography. And I'm envious of your sense of wonder, which you clearly haven't lost and which seems to be renewed every time you take one of those hours in the cockpit. And really, I want to thank you. We've lost a few, but not many. We had over 90 people, more than 90 people here tonight, which breaks all our previous records. So you have a new flight record here. And,
I'm going to put that in my logbook.
Yes, please. So we're incredibly grateful for these beautiful images and for your wonderful commentary and how articulate and clear you are when you're describing your process. So
well, thank you so much, Sandy. It's been a pleasure. I hope
other people will get in touch, and if you don't close out of this, you can still read through the chats yourself. There's lots and lots of comments here.
Great, I'll do that. And thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate the opportunity. And to those 90 odd people who lasted through all 45 minutes, I appreciate your patience. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, next, while we have your attention, next in March, the first Wednesday of the month, I don't know what the date is, maybe the 3rd or 4th, we have David Bradford, who has co-written a book on how to have extraordinary relationships with friends, family, and colleagues. So it's a completely different kind of topic, but also fascinating and very useful. So take care, Barrie. Thank you.
Thank you again.